Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf has resigned just over a year into the top job. And it's safe to say there are plenty of people who are happy to see him go. The reaction to the news that he's stepping down has been brutal, and we'll get to what's being said in a moment, but fair. Many are pointing out that his obsession with identity politics and failure to listen to women is what's contributed to his political demise.
Brilliant news, aye. Maybe get our country back and stop with these speech laws, hate speech.
I think it's a very good thing. Scotland needs a firm minister to take the country forward.
Now let's take a look at the legacy he leaves behind, starting with a speech he gave in 2020 around the time the Black Lives Matter protests were erupting.
When the most senior positions in Scotland are filled almost exclusively by those who are white. Take my portfolio alone. The Lord President, white. The Lord Justice Clerk, white. Every High Court judge, white. The Lord Advocate, white. The Solicitor General, white. The Chief Constable, white. Every Deputy Chief Constable, white. Every Assistant Chief Constable, white. The Head of the Law Society, white. The Head of the Faculty of Advocates, white. Every Prison Governor, white. And not just Justice. The Chief Medical Officer, white. The Chief Nursing Officer, white. The Chief Veterinary Officer, white. The Chief Social Work Advisor, white. Almost every trade union in this country headed by people who are white. In the Scottish Government, every Director General is white. Every chair of every public body is white. That is not good enough.
Elon Musk was one of many who labelled Humza Yousaf a racist over this rant. Now, ironically, when Scotland's controversial hate crime law was being brought in, a law that doesn't protect women, Humza Yousaf was reportedly the subject of many complaints over that speech. Here are the hosts on the late debate tackling this issue.
The hot topic in the Western world is hate speech laws, and many people fear that they are de facto blasphemy laws. This is playing out in Scotland at the moment. Laws introduced of all days on April the 1st, which is quite ironic, to criminalise stirring up hate against protected identity groups. We've talked about this a couple of times, but just to let you know, there were more than 8,000 complaints in just the first week that these laws had been enacted. And of course, you can make an anonymous complaint to the police, and the police have promised they will follow up every single complaint. Well, Caleb, they're now saying that 8,000 in 1 week, if this trajectory continues, within 9 months, hate crimes will overtake all other crimes put together. Officers have been brought back from holidays to do overtime in order to chase up all of these complaints.
Hang on, I reckon it's the officers making the complaints themselves. They're generating work, they're getting the overtime. Why wouldn't you do it?
It could be, and many of the complaints within the first 24 hours at least were against Scotland's First Minister for a speech he made in Parliament a couple of years ago where he criticised, Caleb, white
people. Yes.
He was asked about this on the BBC and whether or not that particular speech was in fact worthy of being reported as a hate crime.
For many Scots who've reported you, goes back to a speech you made in 2020 where you went through a whole series of important senior public posts in Scotland which are held by white people, and you made a very powerful point about how white. Scotland is 96% white, and there are some very active people, particularly on social media, who are saying Humza Yousaf's message was essentially racist. It was anti-white. Under the new legislation, the police also have to, as I understand it, record it as a non-criminal hate incident, and you will be named. How do you feel about that?
So a couple of points to make. The description of those who reference that speech as hatred, I've not seen anybody who has described it in that way that isn't, frankly, part of the far right.
It's interesting that the BBC interviewer called it a powerful speech when most of Scotland called it a racist speech. It tells you a lot, not just about the First Minister of Scotland, but also about the BBC. But then he has the hide to call anyone who complains far right. Is that not hate speech?
That's very Trudeau-esque, because the way the left use the term far right is to be like outsider, nut job, like whatever they say, no validity, no merit whatsoever. They're those people. And so it's a disparaging sledge that is everyone of their ilk hears and goes, oh, yeah, they're just nutcases, like forget about them. They're probably white supremacists, which also goes hand in hand with the whole far right, conspiracy theorists, white supremacists. Just add every single bigot, every single thing in there. Is very Trudeau-esque. He uses this a lot. Oh, these far right people, that we can't be having them, and did, in fact, during the pandemic, then list off all the things that they were, which were all the names that I just said above. So it's very dismissive. It's like literally half of the complaints that they'd received were about you and this speech. You're the First Minister, and all he can say in his defence was, well, they're just far right. Well, that means Scotland's the place for me, baby, because it sounds like there's a lot of them still there. I mean, I'm heading to Scotland.
Journalist Brendan O'Neill has written in Spike today, Humza Yousaf is everything that's wrong with modern politics. He goes on to say his condescending style is directly reflective of his condescending politics. Susan Daggerty wrote in The Scotsman, Humza Yousaf could have reached out to groups like For Women Scotland on becoming First Minister. Instead, he treated them with contempt. Now, earlier this month, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling accused Humza Yousaf of showing absolute contempt for women over Scotland's new misogyny law. She wrote on X, women were excluded from his nonsensical hate crime law. Now he introduces a misogyny law designed to also protect men. Just a few days ago, J.K. Rowling wrote that Humza Yousaf is experiencing a little thing called karma as his leadership began to crumble. Now, having a quick look online, here are some of the messages that are being posted about his resignation. One person posted on X, good riddance. Another wrote, now they have to clean up his mess. And another posted, good news, I hope they elect someone better. So it's clear Humza Yousaf is not going to be missed. He will continue as First Minister until a successor has been elected. The Scottish Parliament now has 28 days to choose a new First Minister before an election is forced.